All right, welcome back, Steve Alcoholic. The worst thing that happened to me during COVID, it wasn't like Peter. It wasn't that I couldn't get a haircut. Uh, it was that when I would speak on a Zoom, as you guys know, they would have the participants number, right? And when you were speaking and you see that number start dwindling as you're talking, that's just heartbreaking. And it's happening in the three-dimensional world here tonight. But I know people will wander in here in a few minutes. But Don Pritz said you must be present to win. So we'll just go ahead and start. When I was talking, we both sort of navigated some of that terrain, hopefully given a little feel for what drinking looked like on us and the carnage that it caused, and beginning to talk about that unmanageability, which I think is an internal condition, not an external. And I view that unmanageability as Peter referenced those bedevilments that are on page 52 in our book. And I would have used different language probably before I got to AA, but when I saw those, I identified with that, right? And it says unhappy drinkers, will understand. And so I didn't know that language, but I knew that applied to me sober. And there's a line back in A Vision for You talking about Dr. Bob. And it says he was painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, for he did not yet fully understand what it meant to be alcoholic. And see, I was painfully aware for years of feeling somehow abnormal. I don't even know that I was. I just felt abnormal. I think some of that's the human condition, and when I stopped drinking, my belief is that self is the problem. And I'm making this journey from self-centered to God-centered, from self-conscious to God-conscious, from self-directed to God-directed. But I got no language for this. All that powerlessness stuff, that phenomenon of craving. How cool is that? I was never out at the bar, and after about my third drink, nudged the guy next to me and said, I don't know about you, pal, but that phenomenon of craving's kicking in on me, I just thought I changed my mind about stuff. But all of this is going, and then I shared with you that I landed on that spot that I believed I was alcoholic. I conceded to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic as I understood alcoholism at that point, and as I understood it relative to my relationship with alcohol. The can't stay stopped, can't control how much I take. I'm alcoholic. And then the next line in the book was the most devastating news I had heard. If so, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. I thought, oh, damn. I got a problem I can't solve. You got a solution I don't believe in. Our book calls that a dilemma, by the way. A dilemma is a problem with two equally unacceptable solutions. See, I do not want to die an alcoholic death at that point, and I do not want to live life on a spiritual basis at that point. I'd like door number 3. But AA doesn't have a door number 3. There may be other pathways to sobriety and to spiritual connection than AA. But if I'm in AA, I believe what the book says, and when we say that, that these are suggestions, I absolutely believe that. If I decide I believe one page, I better believe the other page, I think. I try not to be selective in what I take out of the book. I'm not a literalist either 100% of the time, but right before, as we're going into how it works to the 12 steps, it says, following are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. On page 164, it says our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. Just a quick aside, I think they were wise not to put that on the first page. If the first line I read was, we realize we know only a little, I said, well, I'd like to go to someone that has done more research, perhaps. But all the way to page 64, they've laid out this program of recovery, and in great humility are saying, look, we don't have all the answers. more will be disclosed. And we are slow to let more be disclosed. By the way, I don't know if you've ever met the guy who realized he know only a little in AA. I've not met him or her, and I ain't him or her. But they're meant to be suggestive only, but here's the thing, it's the only suggestion we got. We don't have a second set of suggestions in AA. And when we get all the way back to working with others, it says if our man wants to try some other spiritual approach, we encourage him to follow his conscience. Keeping in mind, we alcoholics have much in common. We do it with kind of a caveat. Do what you think. Follow your gut. Follow your best thinking. Follow your consciousness. But keep in mind, if you are alcoholic, if it turns out that then this could be life-threatening. But we don't. How many times have I said something smart alecky to somebody leaving that? Oh, you'll be back. For several years in my early sobriety, when somebody left AA, I'm ashamed to say this, and I didn't use my outside voice, but I hoped they'd get drunk to make me feel better about my choice. And today, when I tell somebody, if they decide they're going to do something else, I say, man, I hope it works, because you're betting your life on it, and I honestly hope it works. But these are the only suggestions we got. So I'm stuck here with a problem I can't solve. I've admitted powerlessness. The book says our human resources, as marshaled by the will, failed utterly. Like I'm a complete failure in trying to address my alcoholism myself, and you are a complete failure in trying to address it for me. The legal system couldn't do it. My wife couldn't do it. My brother, mother / employers, because they were both the same thing, couldn't do it. Circumstances were insufficient. No human resources. It's like when you work in, some of you probably work in a corporation where they have a human resources department. And if I'm at my desk and I've got something I can't get done, this is over my head, I don't understand this, I would call human resources and say, who we got on staff that can do this? And they check the roster and they call back and they go, Steve, we got nobody on our staff that can do that. Says we're going to have to outsource this. And we outsource it, or more accurately probably, we insource it. We're going to that power greater than me, which can solve my problem. But when I'm over here and I read that, if so, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer, I'm in a tough spot. I don't want to die an alcoholic death. I don't want to live on a spiritual basis. I don't believe it'll work for me. I'm uncomfortable with the language. I went through the book the first year I was sober and blacked out everywhere in the book that it said spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. It looked like a CIA redacted volume of the big book. And because that language made me uncomfortable. I wouldn't hold hands and pray at the end of the meetings. I would step back from the Lord's Prayer. And I'm grateful that AA said that's okay. That's okay. Because we want to let people stay long enough to find their way. You didn't make me know the rules and play the game 100% correctly when I got here. That's the keep coming back that we always joke about when a guy like me is running his mouth or getting up in the middle of the meeting or, doing whatever. Some people pull me aside and might have a little conversation about meeting etiquette, etc. But nobody tried to run me off because I wasn't yet understanding how to play or didn't believe. AA is where I learned about AA. AA is where I learned about alcoholism. You didn't send me somewhere else first, and I'm grateful for that. But I wouldn't hold hands and say the prayer. I'd step back away from it. And a guy who had been one of my counselors in treatment, but was 14 years sober at the time, he came up to me after one of the meetings and he said, Steve, what's the deal on that? You still doing that? Tell me why. And I was as earnest and honest as I could be, and I said, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I said, I don't know what I believe, and I'm not just going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya with the rest of the campers, because that's what you guys are doing. And this guy had heard my treatment fifth step, which was as honest a confession as I could make at the time. So I talked about being drunk at the hospital when my daughter was born. I talked about infidelities in my marriage. I talked about 6 DUIs and head-on collision and sending people to the hospital. I talked about stealing time and money from a family business. And he said, but hypocrisy, that's where you draw the line, huh? He said, that's really impressive, man. He said, I got good news for you and bad news for you. And I felt a little condescended to. And if you've ever felt condescended to in AA, it's because someone was just condescending. And he said, I got good news and bad news for you. And I said, I'll play. What's the bad news? He said, the bad news is hypocrisy is way down your list of problems. And you might ought to address them in the order in which they will kill your ass. I said, what's the good news? He said, the good news is there's room for another hypocrite in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's better news for me tonight than it was then. There's room for another. And it allowed me just to step in a little bit, right? Just crack the door and start doing something I didn't believe in. But it was more important for me to be a part of you without the belief than to continue to be separate. The reason I blacked out the words in the big book was that language made me uncomfortable. Well, Peter mentioned it earlier. My sponsor took me back to Appendix 2 in the book on spiritual experience, where there was language that was more accessible to me. And above those blacked out spaces where I had blacked out spiritual experience or spiritual awakening, I wrote personality change, because it talks about a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. And I was willing to have a personality change before I was willing to have a spiritual experience. And my sponsor said, he said, you're hung up on language, and I want you to have an experience, and I don't care what you call it. That's the wonderful thing. You get to go have this experience, and you get to describe it personal to you. The relationship you develop is personal to you. And so I want you to have the experience, not get hung up on the language. The book gave me that freedom when it said that I shouldn't let any prejudice I have against spiritual terms stop me. It says, in fact, decide what they mean to you. What kind of freedom is that? I get to pick a word and make up the definition. There's a huge freedom there. See, and I'm just hung up on all this stuff that was just this intellectual, some sort of trying to hang on to my man card somehow. My ego telling me, that's all the ego. The ego is the separator. It separates me from you. It separates me from God. That's what Chamberlain said our primary problem was this conscious, an awareness. I'm conscious of separation from you and separation from God. So I feel I'm a guy that was social, that was personable, that looked outgoing. Man, that was hard work sober, because I felt none of those things. I felt insecure. I felt self-conscious. I felt uncomfortable. And I know what it's like to stand in front of a door, and I don't mean just before I got sober, sometimes today, to stand in front of a door and get ready to walk into a work situation or a family situation or a social situation and steel myself up to go into that room and act like a guy would act if he were comfortable, if he were personable, if he were outgoing, if he were at ease. And then leave and that door closed behind me and feel empty. The alcoholic will know loneliness as few do. I just never put that word to how I felt. That loneliness is the sense of separation, the sense of, and I act like we're connected. When our 12 and 12 says that we have a total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. My belief is, in my case, the reason is I never brought honestly who I was to a relationship. I'm walking into a room, I'm taking a look, and I'm thinking, what do I need to show them today? What do I need to do here? I'd been at a meeting in Richmond, Virginia at about 4 years sober. I talked about it as long as I've talked here tonight, and it was not a speaker meeting. And I got home, I called my sponsor who had been there, and I said, Joe, did I sound self-righteous in that meeting tonight? And he said, oh, Steve, you're still asking all the wrong questions. He says, because the question isn't, did you sound self-righteous? The question is, were you self-righteous? He said, but the truth is, you don't care whether you were self-righteous or not. You're afraid they think you're self-righteous. And he was right. And he said, here's the news, kid. He said, you're not who you think you are. And you're not even who they think you are. And you are especially not who you think they think you are. And I will tell you, that was just like a V8 moment. Oh, I've spent all my life taking actions or not taking actions based on what I think you'll think. How will this look? How will it sound? How will it play? Because I would rather be dead than embarrassed. You ever walk down the street and trip over that little, on the sidewalk, and that just you just trip, and then your arms flail around, and nobody looks good doing that, right? And I don't know about you, but the first thing I do is look around to see who saw me. I'm not focused on what I tripped over. I'm focused on what you think about me tripping. See, and my sponsor said, you're not worried about the defect, you're worried about what the defect looks like on you. So all of these feelings that are separating me from you in my mind, because my mind, the pride and the ego are the self. I refer to those, when I say self, that's what I mean, pride and ego. And pride and ego come disguised as my friends. And they say, we're here to help. And they're the ones that say, you can't tell them that. You can't let them see that. You can't look like that. You can't possibly be honest here. That wouldn't work. I'm leaving the house one night. Again, my daughter was probably 7 or 8. I'm a couple years sober. I'm headed out to a meeting. I'm coming downstairs, and she looked at me, and she said, Dad, you going to wear that shirt? I went, not now. No, I can't. You've ruined it for me now. I got to go. In fact, come up, pick something out for me. Because I can't leave, because what if you don't like the shirt I got on? By the way, I don't know what you think, but this is a winner tonight. You know the song, most of you have heard the verse that says you gotta dance like nobody's watching, you gotta sing like nobody's listening, right? You gotta dress for yourself. All of those things, the freedom of that bondage of self, but I don't have that because my ego is telling me I'm different. But anyway, I am got all those things blocked off. All those things are keeping me from, I'm stuck. I think I'm stuck at step 2 because I think something's supposed to happen for me at step 2. Step 2, I believe, in its simplest form, is a description of the solution that AA offers. That a power greater than myself will return me to sanity. The description of insanity that I'm most attracted to in the book is right after Jim pours the whiskey in his milk. And the fact that he put whiskey in milk is not what makes Jim crazy. But it says just before the paragraph, it says that he knew one more drink meant another trip to the asylum, loss of his family, loss of job. He knew that, yet all those reasons were easily pushed aside for the idea of a drink. And it says no matter what the precise definition may be, no matter what the psychiatrists say, no matter what the DSM-5 says, no matter what an academic says, the precise definition is, it says, what can this lack of proportion and the ability to think straight be called but insanity? And I realize that I've gone through life with a lack of proportion. I see things out of proportion. I over-respond. You can just nick me and I am hurt. I often under-respond to the damage and harm I've done others. I don't recognize it. I'm so self-centered that I have said and done things to my wife and daughter, and I don't mean, again, 20 years ago, probably Tuesday, that I don't recognize sometimes it's out of proportion. I don't recognize that I've caused harm, unless I'm doing some of the reviews we'll talk about later. So all of that I thought was stopping me. And I finally found a way to move forward before I actually had some of the belief, but there's a story, it's a Sufi story, and I always feel I thought I had the accent. Is it Peter or me that has the accent this weekend? It's hard to tell. But there's a Sufi story, and it's called The Blind Men and the Elephant. It says, there were 3 men from Hindustan to learning much inclined. They went to see an elephant, but all of them were blind. And one of them grabbed the elephant by its tail. And the other one grabbed the elephant around its leg. And the third one grabbed the elephant by its trunk. And they went back to their village, and the villagers were saying, tell us about an elephant. Tell us about the elephant. And the one who grabbed the elephant by the tail said it was like a rope. And the one who grabbed it around its big leg said it was like the trunk of a tree. And the one who grabbed it by its trunk said it was snake-like. And they argued endlessly about what an elephant was, never recognizing that the elephant was big enough to encompass all those traits and all those characteristics. So they weren't describing the elephant, they were describing their touch point to the elephant. They were describing their relationship to the elephant. So that has given me freedom in AA on this higher power thing that I wasn't able to. It says no one can fully define or comprehend that power. That's comforting to me. Collectively, we can have a think tank in here, and none of us can fully define or fully comprehend that power. The other thing that does for me is I can never fully define or comprehend you. There is more to us. All I know is our relationship and what I can observe from my point of view. And there's always more. I was a few years ago, Connie and I, maybe just pre-pandemic, but I'd had one of those days, and most of you have had it. I was really in a position to help somebody, and it was, and it was a big deal to them, and that made it a big deal to me. And just, man, there was just no end to my goodness between 8 and noon that day. And I'm riding that wave, right, and it's all good. And then Connie and I are going to a Vanderbilt basketball game. We're big Vanderbilt fans, and running late, and traffic's bad, and a guy came over into what was clearly my lane. And I wheeled around, and I flipped him off, and I MF'd him, and I'm screaming at him. And Connie's looking at me like I'm crazy, and then we both start laughing at me, which happens a lot. But what I would tell you is if you found those people I was with that morning and said, tell me about Steve, man, I would have gotten a glowing report. And if you found that guy that I had just flipped off and said, tell me about that guy, and he would have, said, that son of a gun. And they're both right about me. See, both of those things are true, and neither of them are the whole story. I am both ends of that spectrum and everything in between. And I want to allow you that same grace. So I only know the nature of our relationship and the touch point. And with this relationship with God, I just know the relationship, my touch point to it, what that feels like to me. We spend a lot of time trying to articulate something that defies articulation. This for me, this relationship with God is I think Anthony DeMello writes, it's like the scent of a rose. Right? Tell me what a rose smells like. It's hard to encapsulate that. Tell me what something tastes like. We use other references when we're trying to say what something tastes like, feels like, smells like. We try to compare it to something else that we've touched, tasted, or felt. But this God thing is bigger than all of that. So all I can do is try to describe my relationship, what it feels like, the experience I'm having as a result of this connection. And we'll dig into that a little more as we move towards step 11 tomorrow. But finding the freedom to move forward in this second step, that where it says that do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe that there's a power greater than yourself? And I reached a point where I was willing to believe. I didn't believe, but I'm willing. I'm going to be a little more open-minded, and I'm going to move into the third step, where the third step is, if the first step is the description of the problem, for me, the second step is a description of the solution. The third step is my decision to seek that solution unreservedly. And that's where I said what I think, feel, and believe no longer is going to dictate my actions. This is where I'm going to start looking to the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous to direct my actions going forward. And no belief is required there, just willingness. So I'll end with the willingness. I was 18 years sober before I looked up the word willingness. And I've only looked it up once because I'm afraid I wouldn't find this definition again. And if you have a different one, don't share it with me. Because the one I found said, doing that which I would not do as a matter of course. And man, that makes perfect sense to me, because there is nothing AA has asked me to do that I was just about to do before I got here, right? There's not a single thing that isn't counterintuitive to the character that showed up here. I have a defective character. I know I do because it produces defects. And the rest of what I'm doing in AA is to repair that character, that inner self, to be more than inwardly rearranged, to be changed, branch and leaf, to be totally, have that entire psychic change, so what it was counterintuitive becomes intuitive. When Bill Story said common sense became uncommon sense. And that's where we're getting ready to head off when we get to the third step, but Peter's going to second step you.
Thanks, Steve. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I heard them talking a whole bunch about God. When I was in treatment, I would hear the other clients talking about God. H and I would come and bring meetings, talk about God. When I went to a halfway house, they would take us to services, and I'm a cradle Catholic, so I go to Catholic church, and I'm talking about God and the carpenter. But I couldn't lock into that. When I was growing up and I watched my mom get sick and sicker with her alcoholism and drug addiction and psych issues, and after many attempts of suicide, finally committed suicide. Where's the loving God that you're talking about? I don't get this. And when I would go to my religious community, my mom would take me to Mass. I would hear a lot of thou shalt nots, or else. And I'm born a sinner, I'm going to die a sinner, and, I don't see any mercy in this. So I get to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm willing to do anything, but I get really tight when they start talking about spiritual walk, because I hear religious walk in my head. Now, for me in my life, they've crisscrossed. It doesn't happen that way for many. They're kind of met in a happy place. And so I really wasn't sure what to do about this. But I was certainly willing to do anything, to try anything, because when I was out there, I was willing to do anything and try anything. And so I was given incredible information. My sponsor always talks about, it's so simple, I miss it. And my first sponsor talked about this, but I encountered this when I was living in Minnesota, and someone said to me, you come to Alcoholics Anonymous because you believe the people there are going to keep you from a drink. It's a group of drunks, G-O-D, for good orderly direction, G-O-D. You believe in the power that's in this room. And when we live life forward and understand it backwards, my first G-O-D didn't feel G-O-D at all. It was a gift of desperation in the back of an abandoned building. It didn't feel like a gift, sound like a gift, certainly didn't, I didn't smell like a gift, but it was very much a gift because it split me wide open. God was happening. See, the cool thing about this walk is this. If I take a sponsor, if I get a sponsor and go through the steps as laid out in the book, step 12 promises me this transformation. I'll be made new from the inside out. But when does it really begin? It's going to happen when I get a sponsor and start going through the steps, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, varying degrees for people, but I'm going to look different. But it really began for me in the worst moment of my life, in a gift of desperation, that thing that happens where we say, this has to stop. I don't know how to stop. This has to change. I got to do something. I need to do something, whether it's Park Avenue or Park Bench. So for me, at the beginning, it was a group of drunks for good orderly direction. That was my higher power. And the book talks about our own conception, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. They don't care as long as I'm not the power. It tells me how, where, and why in chapter 2 Agnostics to find God. How? Lay aside old ideas. They don't even say your old ideas, Pete, were bad. They're no good. They just say lay them aside. Because I can't have a spiritual experience based on my old information. I need to make room for new. It tells me where to find God. It's been in here all along. God doesn't love me if I change. He loved me so that I change. When I was living in an abandoned building, there was just as much God in me then as there is tonight. God's always pursuing, always begging to have a relationship, going to any lengths to have a relationship. Just one day I wake up to it and I hear this other voice. You know that voice sometimes you hear go, okay, something else is telling me to do something. Do you ever do this? Get someplace and find out some information, say, something told me to call that person and I didn't. or something told me to call you and I'm so glad I did. What voice is that? Amid all the other voices, there's that other voice. We always recognize it. And why I should find this power when I see other people solving their problems with this simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe. How can I doubt the power of God? When I was out in Minnesota, I was taken to a meeting called the Three Legacies meeting. The room was like this big, filled on a Friday night. Very proper looking AAs, all shirt and tie and suits and the whole nine. And I would listen to these speakers get up there at the podium, men and women, and somewhere during their talk, they would talk about God. And there was a gentleman, Chuck R., who used to take me around, and these old timers had 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 years. They were ancient. And they would sit with me and talk to me about God. When I saw these people solving their problem, plural, with the simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe, how could I doubt the power of God? I walk into a room and everyone's saying, but for the grace of God, God did this for me. God did for me what I can do for myself. I'm seeing what's going on here. But it began with baby steps, a group of junks for good early direction. Now, it's interesting what our book says. It says here difficulty arises when we mention God. What I had to find out, and I did, the difficulty is not with God towards me or any of us. The difficulty is me towards God with my old perceptions and conceptions about God. I heard spirituality, that means religion. I knew they were going to bring this in here. And they weren't doing that at all. I remember my first sponsor had me do something. It was brilliant. It wasn't in the book. It was a spiritual assignment. He says, write down your old conception of God. And I wrote down what I've heard a lot of us talk about. I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. Then he said, write about your current conception of God. I do that with men now. Who are you praying to? What does your prayer life look like? What does it sound like? Who are you praying to? Is a prayer negotiation a business transaction? What does that look like? So I wrote down my current conception of God. At the time, I was starting to lean back into the carpenter, but it had a lot to do with you. And then he said, write about what you would like to have a relationship look like in the future with this God. And he stretched me wide open. And I use adjectives like loving and caring and forgiving, almost like a wonderful parent that knowledgeable elder that wouldn't judge me. And I wrote that down. And that, he says, right there is the growth, that you're willing to even take a peek at this. It's interesting what happens when I'm willing to believe in this power greater than myself, to restore me to sanity, wholeness of mind, truth in the solution. It's just a starting point. I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to trust you rather than me. I'm willing to trust my home group, all the elders who are telling me, tonight, go home and pray, do some reading, and go to bed, and you'll wake up sober tomorrow. Okay, I'll do that. I don't have to have some profound experience, some electrifying experience, and know my Creator. What we're looking at is, are you willing to even try this? Back to step 1, yes. Because I can't go there anymore. I can't handle that kind of pain anymore. And somewhere I start to move through the steps, and by the time I get to step 10, it's incredible what it says. Step 2 says, came to believe the power greater than myself, restore me to sanity. Step 10 says, sanity has been returned. It's been restored. I'm a recovered alcoholic. In the ABCs, it says that where alcohol cannot manage your own life, that no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism, that God could and would if he was sought. And somewhere that changes into God has and he will, as long as I seek him. Step 2 is I'm seeing it happening. I'm seeing it happen in you, I'm seeing it happen in me, and I'm willing to go in that direction. Lack of power, it says, was my dilemma. I needed to find power, not just to stay away from the drink, but because when I'm not drinking, I'm still in trouble, which is going to solve all my problems, my living problem, my going around. I need a new GPS here. I'm failing miserably. Everything is paramount. My thinking is paramount. The broken shoelace is paramount. I'm riding this emotional roller coaster. I'm sober, but I can't get traction with God. Am I willing to turn this to God? Am I willing to get out of this mess? Step 2 is a pointer out of all of this. I'm not there yet. Some of us might remember before cell phones and a little GPS box in the car, you would pull over and ask directions. Well, I forget what it was. There's Automobile Club of America. If you were traveling a long distance, they send you this big book with this yellow thing on how to get. I can't read that, so I pull over. Excuse me, how do I get to First Street? Go up to the light and make a left. So there's been plenty of times I'm driving around. I remember first going to New Jersey, northern New Jersey. There's no lights. And I'm on some road, I don't know where I'm going. And I'm driving around in circles. Oh my God, and I see a light up ahead, like street lights. Follow those lights. There's got to be people. It's better than driving around in the dark. Step 2 is like that. I've been making circles in the dark, and up ahead there's light. Do I want to go there? It might say, highway this way. Okay, good, I'm home. You know that relief when you finally get on the road? Okay, I know where I am. I'll be home in a half hour. Great. I can find my way home. This process of recovery is about going home. The Oxford group talked about purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. I'm sure I'll never get absolutely pure, honest, and unselfishness and loving, but it's a road towards that. It's a road towards that place, that spiritual place deep down in here where we operate out of, where, although my life, your life, our lives, to civilians out there might look awfully ordinary. They go to work, they go to a meeting, they celebrate with a birthday cake, they go to a diner, a terrible cup of coffee. They're saying they had a great time, then they go home, go to sleep, and do it all over again. That appears to be very ordinary, but we know how it is extraordinary. That we're actually participating in our recovery. We're actually participating in life, and we're leaning into this power called God. I get a little self-reliant now and again, and I go, okay, God, please take over. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. A group of drunks for good early direction. And then we get to take a look at step 3 and make a decision to do something about this. Sitting on the couch, I'm eating banana splits, watching Netflix marathons, and after about 3 months I can't tie my shoes because my gut's in the way and I'm out of breath walking from the living room to the kitchen and everything hurts, and I go, honey, I'm going to get in shape starting Monday. It's always Monday, right? And then Monday comes, and then Monday goes, but I says, hey, I'm going to go to the gym. Honey, I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to do something about this. But I don't do anything. I'm talking a whole lot. I'm reading books on how to work out. I'm watching videos on YouTube on proper form and how to work out. I'm reading stuff about, I can tell you how to do it. I'll offer it even if you don't ask. I'll tell you, take my advice. I don't need it. And so I do this stuff, but I don't go to the gym. Or I go to the gym. We can do this in AA. I go to the gym for 90 days in a row. I get there early and I stay late. First one in the gym, last one to leave, and I walk around. And I start to learn all about the machines. I know the gym manager, I know the gym owner, I know the regular gym attendees. We talk to each other. I know where the towels are, the water cooler is, I know where the showers are, I know where the whirlpool is, I know where everything is. And after 90 days, I can tell you how to work out. The new people coming in, I straighten your back. Use your shoulders. I know all of it. But after 90 days, I know all this information. I'm walking around the gym, and I've gotten fatter and more out of shape. But this other guy came in with me. We went in together. And for those 90 days, he's burning his body while he's in there. He's pushing, he's making mistakes and tripping and falling, and the gym guy saying, you're doing it wrong. He's, okay, tell me how to do it. And after 90 days, this guy's starting to look pretty good. And I hate him, and I tell you the gym don't work, and I don't go back anymore. When I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, I gotta do some work. I gotta chop wood and carry water. I'm gonna make a ton of mistakes, I still do, but I'm willing to get back in the saddle and ride again. Yeah, chop wood and carry water. Because God doesn't judge me for screwing up. Not if I'm willing to do it. So the question I always ask is, where am I tonight at 10 to 9 on a Friday with my God? The power I went to get me sober, do I go to that same power to keep me happy? Do I go to that same power with life's problems? Or do I think I can handle them? Where am I with this power called God? Is it tangible in my life? And if it isn't, it doesn't mean we're bad AAs, but maybe I need to do a little bit more. Sometimes maybe even a little bit less. Like I said earlier, I was brought up by very rigid teachers, and I loved them all. They were great teachers. But it seemed to be, it got to a point, and God bless Don P., rest his soul, he says, you spend more time in that book writing and studying than out there living. We're supposed to get this and go out there. How can you talk about this if you're, writing inventory to 2 o'clock in the morning? That's not Alcoholics Anonymous. That's belonging to a cult. And I heard him. Does my life look and feel joyous, happy, and free? So hopefully tomorrow morning we'll get to 3 and kick that around. I have nothing left. I'm overheated, and there's no voice left, and I've been up since 3 a.m. So that's all I got, guys. Peace.